Article 1225. For the purposes of the preceding articles, obligation to give definite things and those which are not susceptible of partial performance shall be deemed to be indivisible. When the obligation has for its object the execution of a certain number of days or work, the accomplishment of work by metrical units, or analogous things which by their nature are susceptible of partial performance, it shall be divisible. However, even though the object or service may be physically divisible, an obligation is indivisible, if so provided by law or intended by the parties. In obligation not to do, divisibility or indivisibility shall be determined by the character of the prestation in each particular case. So, Article 1225 talks about the rules on how to determine if it is indivisible or divisible obligation. I think we are all settled on the rule that the purpose of the obligation is the controlling circumstance for determining if the obligation is divisible or not divisible. These rules not only apply in obligation to give but also to obligation to do and not to do. So what are the object which is divisible or not indivisible? Ano nga ba ang sabi ng Article 1125? So paragraph 1 and 3 talks about indivisible obligation, while paragraph 2 talks about divisible obligation. So, paragraph 1, we have two situations. First is the obligation to give definite things and it is indivisible. Example, to deliver a specific bag. It is definite thing, so meaning it is indivisible. And the second on the paragraph 1 is the obligation which is susceptible for partial performance. So, the example here is to render a dance. It cannot be on a partial. Here, the obligation is indivisible by reason of its purpose, which requires of a performance of all its parts. But we have a question. Does the obligation still indivisible if there are more than one participant? So, if the situation is like that, the obligation is divisible as far as the participants are concerned. Let's proceed with the third paragraph. That will talks about what is deemed indivisible obligation. It is said also, even though the object or service may be physically divisible, the obligation is indivisible if so provided by law or intended by the parties. We have another two scenarios here in paragraph 3, where it is deemed indivisible obligation, and one of these is when the obligation is so provided by the law to be indivisible. Example, payment of tax. Under the law, tax should be paid within a definite period, so although money is physically divisible, the amount of tax payable must be delivered as a whole. On the payment of tax, we should pay it as a whole, not by partial. Example, the obligation of Laura to give 2,000 pesos to Maria on that certain date. Obviously, the money is divisible, but then the intention of the parties is to give the full amount of 2,000 pesos at once or as a whole. So, it will become indivisible. So, let's go back on the second paragraph. It discusses the obligation which is deemed divisible. So first, when the obligation has for its object the execution of certain number of days of work. It is simple as when the laborer is hired to work for 10 days. Another scenario, the shows deems divisible. The accomplishment of work by metric units. So, example, when the laborer is hired to construct a street 3 meter wide by 50 meter long, like that. So, by metric units. Another deemed divisible, analogous things which by the nature are susceptible or the partial performance.